My name's Kasia Hollish and thank you for joining me here. As CELTI teachers, we often encourage our trainees to ensure a decent variety of feedback and refer them to criterion 5H in their CELTA 5s. However, how often do we ourselves use a variety of techniques in order to give oral feedback to our trainees? This session aims to offer some practical ideas on how we can make our feedback varied, engaging and memorable. I've always been interested in variety, all sorts of variety. Being very active, one might say hyperactive, I get bored quickly and cannot stand sameness. Therefore, I always try to do different things to keep myself interested. I apply this to many parts of my personal and professional life. I've been teacher training for a while now, and at some point I became fed up with the way I was giving feedback to trainees. Naturally, I started to experiment with varied ways of providing them with feedback. While at the beginning, I think it's more than appropriate to be directive in one's approach to feedback giving. In fact, I believe it's expected by many trainees, especially those in the pre-service sector, as they simply do not know how to do things differently or how to reflect on things. However, as the CELTA course moves forward and our trainees take more responsibility for their own learning, I think it's a good idea to involve them more, have them interact, encourage critical thinking and reflection. I try to do this by employing different feedback techniques. Everything is trial and error. Some things work and some things have been a complete flop. We all know that it's progress and not perfection that matters. I'm sure that we are aware that feedback is a very sensitive, vulnerable space, and the relationship that we have with our trainees is very important. It should be about partnership, cooperation, and not dominance with high amounts of TTT. Here I mean tutor talking time. There has to be empathy and awareness of every individual in the room. Everything is relative. What works for one person might not work for another. It's all about nurturing development. We all know that by week 3, full-time courses, both trainers and trainees are tired. And therefore, I feel that the longer the feedback is, the less they retain. So perhaps, rather than eliciting their ideas, we can make feedback more engaging. There are some ideas I'd like to share. You might already be familiar with some of them. You'll notice that some of them have names, titles. Speed dating. There are 2 rows. Observers sit opposite the teachers. They have 2 minutes to talk about the lessons. Teachers always speak first, and we should encourage to have them focus on different aspects of a lesson every time they change, because after 2 minutes the teachers change or time and the observers move 1 seat to speak to the second teacher. Then trainer wraps it up by summarizing the most important elements of the lessons. Be your tutor is another method. A trainee is asked to view their lesson from their tutor's perspective. A trainee predicts 3 to 5 areas that they think their tutor included in their feedback. They discuss it with a partner, then they compare it with the tutor's written feedback. Questions are asked at the end. Identify your feedback. In version A, teachers work together, preferably in a separate room. Observers work together in a different room and write feedback on the board or Padlet about each teacher's TP, but without naming the sections of the board. You might ask them to write 4th column for an extra challenge. Teachers are then invited to the room and they have to identify which feedback is theirs. A discussion follows. In version B, tutor displays their depersonalized feedback on the board. We have to check first if it's okay to share feedback, as some trainees might be sensitive about it. Teachers then need to identify their feedback and Q&A follows. Answer my question. While observing, a tutor writes questions to be discussed during feedback. Questions are then cut out on slips of paper. Each trainee picks one up and discusses the question with the others. This really allows to focus on the areas the tutor wants the discussion to concentrate on. Gallery feedback. In version A, general statements are displayed around the room and trainees discuss them with a partner. In version B, teachers collect comments displayed on slips of paper around the room that they believe were made about their lessons. then they justify their choices. Draw your feedback is something that I thought initially wouldn't be very successful, but it was. Observers and teachers are paired up and they draw their feedback, their visualization, their ideas, their connotations. It's quite memorable. Let me be a thief. Observers decide what they would steal, any teaching ideas, from those that they observed and why. The sound of music. Observers and teachers choose a song to best describe each lesson. Once we had Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, and we had an idea during the conference of Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears. This was a suggestion made by one trainer, which was great. Choose 6 adjectives, words to describe or illustrate a lesson. Trainees, the observers, have to choose the adjectives. Later they elaborate on them. They can use MindMeister to do it. And then we have a convenient written record of it. Next one is choose one area of your lesson you were pleased with and one to work on. Justify your choice. True or false? Tutor prepares statements from written feedback, displays them, and trainees decide if they're true or false. Again, they have to rationalize their choices. This is something that Joe Gakonga called to be or not to be, which I think is great. Observers tick achieved assessment criteria as they watch the lessons. Some centers give trainees a gradually growing list of criteria. There are 10 for TP1 and 2, about 15 for TP3 to 4. Therefore, this can be used during observation and feedback. It can potentially raise trainees' awareness of the assessment criteria and what we talk about in feedback. When I did this most recently, one trainee observer said, "Oh yeah, today she nailed 2A." A list of action points. Observers are given a list of action points from previous TPs for one teacher, and while observing, they focus on these areas. Feedback in pairs follows. This allows us to focus on development and have observers be very concentrated on certain areas only. I'm the captain. In version A, trainees write 5 areas on the board they would like to discuss, that they have concerns about. So it's not the tutor that chooses the topics. In version B, a trainee takes on the role of the trainer to facilitate feedback while we moderate it. Final feedback statements. A personalized sheet is given to help observers give holistic feedback. It's quite similar to the true-false, but we have doesn't do yet, doesn't do, or doesn't do well. It's all about you. Each trainee is given a different color A4 paper. They write their name in the middle and pass it to the partner who needs to write a positive comment about their person. It's a very nice way to finish the TPs on, and it's a nice summary of someone's development throughout the course. And it has to be positive. I've also tried out different online observations and feedback methods. I used Padlet, WhatsApp chats, Slack, Google Drive, Quizlet.com with varied levels of success. While I was doing all of this, I started to think, okay, but what about the trainees? Do they really want to have varied feedback? And as we can see, what emerged from an online survey was that the majority wanted to receive varied feedback, and it was mostly perceived as non-threatening. We can also see the most popular methods. In everything we do, we have to give them space, be engaging, not be dismissive, acknowledge what they're saying and what they are not saying. Let feedback be a negotiating space, a space for a dialogue without unnecessary convolutions, a space with mutual trust and respect, where you coax responses from your trainees, where you seek their opinions, where you record yourself for your own self-awareness. We always want to raise their self-awareness. How about our own as trainers? Here are some of the comments that my trainees made. And when I was reading through them, I was pleased because my theory was being corroborated. We need variety. I was very happy to discover that trainees felt comfortable, that they felt great, until I saw this feedback. I thought to my horror, oh no, did I really attack someone? Did I really make them feel uncomfortable? There was nothing positive, really? In an instant, I forgot about 35 odd responses and was in despair that I made someone feel uncomfortable, which is not meant to happen in feedback. And what happened is exactly what we tell our trainees not to do. We tell them, do not get fixated on the criticism, focus on the development. But I couldn't. But let's face it, we're all human, and it will happen no matter how hard we try not to offend or embarrass. Somebody will take feedback no matter how varied personally. So I allowed myself a moment of vulnerability, and next time I give feedback, I will do my best to be even more empathetic and sensitive to my trainees' needs. In a nutshell, let's practice what we preach, and let's make Criterion 5 an integral part of what we do post-TP. It's important that we seek our trainees' opinions on what works for them and what does not, so we become more informed about their preferences. After all, it's not about our preferences. Thank you very much for joining me here. Special thank you to Joga Konga for her inspirational videos, and the trainees at IH Milan and IH Izmir for participating in the survey.